biodiversity initiatives within LCOY China's topic this year, I decided to focus on lands that have been abandoned or even forgotten. Post-war battlefields and post-major environmental accident zones are ripe for dedicated ecosystem rewilding, which expands biodiversity rapidly, is progress that is unlikely to be undone, as the human population and exploitation interests are so low in these areas. These zones all have some important features in common. They are large areas where humans have left, but plants and animals were unmolested. With dedicated funding infusions, partly from Azerbaijan's COP29 later this year, these regions could each act as seeding projects, expanding the biodiversity of life outwards from the countries which they are found from by using corridors. These regions are at a special advantage because they are not starting from primary succession, but rather from pre-existing habitats that have been left for years or even decades to flourish. To keep this presentation manageable in length, I chose 4 regions from all across the globe with which these efforts could be initially focused on, but there are a plethora of options beyond them. They are Korea's demilitarized zone, Ukraine's Chernobyl exclusion zone, Marshall Islands' various nuclear bomb testing sites, and Angola's demined war zone from the 1990s. The Korean Peninsula signed an armistice in 1953, creating a demilitarized zone, or the DMZ, that divided the country into North and South Korea, roughly along the 38th parallel north. While the war was not officially ended by this armistice, there has been no fighting in the countries of any scale since it was signed. The DMZ is a 250-kilometer long by 4-kilometer wide tract of land that has no military installations and merely 2 small villages, each with very few people inside them. Some of the most built-up military installations of the 2 countries could be found on each side of this buffer zone. They have allowed nature to proliferate freely without any human interference, as no one can get past the soldiers even if they wanted to. In the 70 years that have passed since, this land, while only accounting for 1.6% of the Korean Peninsula landmass, now holds up to 20% of the 2 country species. Nearly 5,000 species of flora and fauna inhabit this area, including 92 endangered ones such as musk deer, Asiatic wild bear, and wild cats. Many more species are expected to be found as the demining of the zone began in 2018 and continues up till today. The land, water, and air of both North and South regions outside of the DMZ became progressively more contaminated by first the 1950 Civil War, then by rapid economic development of the 1960s and 70s. However, the land inside the DMZ has remained pristine and untouched, yet still covered with hundreds of thousands of landmines. Therefore, I propose that demining progress should continue or accelerate it, paid for by the military companies responsible for producing the mines themselves, where possible, regardless of the political stalemate that continues, with very different types of governance on both sides of this border. Animals and plant wildlife can be reintroduced from the DMZ to regions both north and south by building animal corridors and tree propagation projects. The Ukraine's Chernobyl exclusion zone is an area circling 30 miles around the factory plant that lies approximately 130 kilometers north of Kiev, Ukraine. The area is relatively empty of humans and civilizations due to the remaining nuclear radiation from the explosion of their nuclear plant in 1986. More than 100,000 people were evacuated from their living area, and more than 200,000 people were permanently relocated elsewhere inside the country. The region was later remediated somewhat by liquidators, or what is more preferably known as emergency workers from countries from the former Soviet Union. There were, it was supposed, more than 600,000 liquidators who came into the incident area to help establish lodgings for the evacuees, building filtration systems, waste repositories, as well as a fence around the fourth reactor with the remaining radioactive materials. While this action prevented the spread of radiation outwards, the zone remained prohibitively high in background radiation such that no one should live there for these past few decades. Apart from a few dozen former inhabitants moving back to the area in the years that followed, despite such being illegal, the zone has remained mostly empty of humans and developments of any kind. Today, 70% of the exclusion zone has returned to forest, and an astonishing amount of wildlife has harbored and flourished there. As opposed to becoming an irradiated wasteland, gray wolves, Eurasian lynx, brown bears, and many other species have proliferated in numbers. The decaying of the fastest isotopes from the initial incident, as well as the adaptation of many species to it, have kept out the humans but provided a niche habitat for the wildlife there. As a suggestion, I propose that the Ukrainian government request a professional cleanup of the radioactive remnants, whether it is to bury them deeper into the ground or to find a way to diminish them in a chemical way. Similarly to the Korean DMZ, biologists can use the flourished ecosystems inside the exclusion zone to reintroduce them to land areas near it, and in turn, reinvigorate ecosystems where human expansion since the 80s has not been as kind to the wildlife. The third example area for consideration is in the Marshall Islands. Throughout 1940s and 1950s, Bikini Atoll, a tropical island that stands halfway between Hawaii and Australia, was the site of 23 nuclear bomb tests, including ones 1,000 times more powerful than the one dropped on Hiroshima in 1945 by the USA. These bombs were powerful to blow up 3 islands in the major lagoon there and had ejected tons of corals and soil up into the sky at that time. Surprisingly, large coral organisms has recently been observed growing well around the crater holes. While some of the regrowth was expected due to the inactivity of humans there for almost 50 years, these organisms are not new and have started growing only a decade or so after the initial bomb test. This implies that corals have already or evolved recently a way to preserve their DNA even after such a deadly nuclear blast. While some of the species are prospering there, the water of the lagoon, as well as land areas near it, are still severely contaminated with nuclear radiation. Therefore, I envision gathering fundings and expertise to help reclaim the contaminated water on the atoll. Confusingly, the coconuts on the islands are radioactive, but the crabs that consume those coconuts are not. Once DNA studies have determined these mechanisms, then the rewilding of all the other atolls, which lacks the regrown abundance of corals, crabs, and several other animal species, may be aided. Sampling from the bikini coral species in particular could be used to help rewild the Great Barrier Reef, closer to Australia, which has suffered from bleaching and human overfishing due to global warming. The fourth and final biodiversity haven that I would like to use as a plausible plan to spread biodiversity outwards is a former war zone, Angola. From the 1975 to 1992, Angola was engaged in a civil war that between 2 anti-colonial guerrilla movements that turned on each other when Portugal, their former colonialist authority, granted the country independence. Landmines have killed many Angolan inhabitants in the few decades that have followed, and many of the rest alive citizens have fled from rural areas to urban ones in search for better employments and shelterings. In 1994, an organization called the Mines Advisory Group, the MAG, started to demine the minefields with the help of the local Angolan governments. In 2021 alone, this group has demined 1.8 million of landmines and aimed for 2 million more in 2022. Therefore, I propose that the demining efforts should be accelerated, because this allows the further expansions of the rewilding efforts of the Angolans. Angola is already worldly renowned as the fourth most biodiverse country in the whole Africa. So, the employment opportunities for the veterans of the 40-year war are vast, as nature guides, conservation officers, anti-poachers, and other roles. This means that Angola, in addition to rewilding, can use this effort to help expand their flagging economy and bring much needed tourism dollars into the nation. With each landmine removed, there is more land made available for the reintroduction of giraffes, rhinos, and thousands of bird species, to name a few. This implies that a sustainable biology or ecosystems can indeed lead to a sustainable national economy. Overall, these regions all represent areas that have been devastated by humans' actions in war, science experiments, and colonialisms, but became enclaves of protections for animals, plants, and microbes that have become rare in other regions in which humans continue to explore, fight, and inhabit it. This speech seeks to point out a key opportunity to rewild surrounding regions and foster faster recovery, funded in large part by COP29's economic recovery model for all such green initiatives. Whether by contamination or political strife, regions that humans have avoided may be the actual key to our continued survival on Earth, as new and old species become encouraged to spread outwards in all directions. Thank you.